Dying on a cold hospital floor teaches a very specific kind of lesson, especially when your mother ignores your fading pulse to comfort the sister who put you there. Unconditional family love is just a scam designed to keep you trapped. Most people never get a second chance to unlearn it. Rebirth isn't a miracle. It is a brutal eviction notice served to the parasites who used my life as a foothold. Welcome to the exact moment my obedience died and my revenge began. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't the sterile bleaching powder stench of the intensive care unit. It wasn't the smell of my own failing organs or the metallic tang of the blood pooling in the back of my throat. It was sandalwood. Expensive sandalwood mixed with the sharp peaty aroma of a 20-year-old scotch. My lungs pulled in a breath. It didn't rattle. It didn't burn. The air flowed smooth and deep, filling a chest that just seconds ago had been crushed under the weight of a collapsed lung. I blinked against the sudden harsh glare of a brass desk lamp. The mahogany wood of my father's study swam into focus. Don't stand there gaping like a fish, Nora. It's unflattering. Harrison's voice, my father. It lacked the usual distant indifference. Today it was laced with a tight, impatient irritation. He was sitting behind his massive desk, his hands steepled, the gold Rolex catching the lamplight. To his right stood Beatrice. My mother wore her pearls like armor, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line, and hovering just behind her shoulder, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed tissue, was Jade, my sister, the golden child, the parasite. A violent shiver racked my body. The memory of my death was still screaming in my nerves. In the previous timeline, the timeline that ended 5 minutes ago for me, but years in the future for them, Jade had drunkenly run her sports car into a pedestrian. She had come to me sobbing, begging. Harrison and Beatrice had demanded I take the fall. You're tough, Nora. You'll survive a few years in a minimum security facility. Jade is too delicate. She'd die in there. We'll owe you. We'll love you. I had believed them. I went to prison. Jade went to a wellness retreat in Bali. I got a shiv in the ribs over a misunderstood glance in the yard. They didn't even claim my body. But I wasn't in prison. I wasn't bleeding out. I was 22 again. I looked down. On the desk, precisely aligned with the edge of the leather blotter, lay 2 stacks of paper. Beside them rested a heavy gold-plated Parker pen. I don't have all day, Nora, Harrison snapped, tapping his watch. The board meeting is at 3. The puzzle pieces of my fractured memory snapped together. I knew exactly what day this was. It was the day of the ultimatum. Jade had racked up $500,000 in debt to an underground gambling syndicate. She had used my fledgling software company, Aegis Logic, as collateral by forging my signature. When the syndicate threatened to break her kneecaps, Harrison and Beatrice summoned me. Remind me, I said. My voice sounded strange, too calm, too steady. What exactly am I looking at? Beatrice sighed. An exaggerated exhalation of pure martyrdom. We've been over this, darling. Jade made a silly mistake. She trusted the wrong people. The easiest way out of this is for you to sign over the controlling shares of Aegis Logic to your father. He'll liquidate the assets, pay off those awful men, and keep your sister safe. Liquidate my company, I repeated. The company I built from the ground up in my dorm room. To pay for her gambling debts. It's just code. Nora. Jade whimpered from behind our mother. You can write more code. They're going to hurt me. And if I refuse? I asked. Harrison leaned forward, his face hardening into the mask of the ruthless corporate raider he was. He pushed the second stack of papers forward. Then you sign these, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a guttural threat. Declaration of severance. You walk away from this family. You forfeit your trust fund, your inheritance, and your name. If you care so little for your sister's life that you'd hold on to a worthless little startup, then you are no daughter of mine. In my previous life, this was the moment I broke. I had collapsed into tears, terrified of losing the only family I had, desperate for their approval, terrified of the cold world outside their mansion. I had ignored the severance papers and signed over my company. The syndicate gutted it. I lost everything, became entirely dependent on them, and eventually became the convenient scapegoat for Jade's vehicular manslaughter. I looked at Harrison. I looked at Beatrice. I looked at Jade. There was no love in this room. There was only a transaction. I was the currency they used to buy Jade's comfort. A slow, strange heat began to spread through my chest. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot and erratic. This was ice-cold crystalline clarity. The phantom pain in my ribs vanished, replaced by an intoxicating, terrifying sense of freedom. I reached out. Harrison's smug smile began to form. He thought I was reaching for the corporate transfer. My hand moved past it. I picked up the heavy Parker pen, uncapped it, and pulled the declaration of severance toward me. Nora. Beatrice's voice faltered. I flipped to the last page. The legal jargon blurred, but the signature line was stark and clear. I pressed the nib to the paper. The scratching sound was loud in the sudden, suffocating silence of the study. Nora Sterling. Wait. No, just Nora. I signed it. I didn't hesitate. I initialed the second page. I initialed the third. I flipped to the notary section, ensuring every single line that severed my legal and financial ties to Harrison and Beatrice was inked in bold, unapologetic blue. What are you doing? Harrison barked, standing up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. Taking out the trash. I said mildly. I capped the pen and placed it gently on top of the executed documents. I slid the stack across the mahogany desk until it bumped against Harrison's knuckles. You're making a colossal mistake. Harrison hissed, his face flushing a deep, dangerous purple. If you walk out that door, you get nothing, not a dime. Your credit cards will be shut off before you hit the driveway. Do it now. I said. Beatrice stepped forward, her composure cracking. Nora, stop this tantrum. This isn't funny. Your sister's life is in danger. Then I suggest Harrison start selling off his vintage cars. I replied, turning my back on them. Or maybe Jade can pawn her jewelry. Not my debt. Not my problem. Nora. Jade shrieked. It wasn't a sad sound. It was the shrill, furious screech of a spoiled child being denied a toy. You can't do this. You owe me. You're my sister. I paused at the heavy oak doors of the study. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see their faces. I had spent a lifetime studying their micro-expressions, tailoring my behavior to avoid their wrath. I was done looking at them. I don't have a sister, I said quietly. The words tasted like honey. I opened the door and walked out. Packing took exactly 14 minutes. The walk-in closet in my bedroom was massive, filled with designer dresses Beatrice had bought to parade me around at galas. Expensive shoes Harrison had gifted me when he needed a tax write-off. I left all of it. I didn't touch the diamond earrings on the vanity or the cashmere coats. I pulled out a faded canvas duffel bag. I packed my college hoodies, 3 pairs of jeans, my running shoes and socks. I grabbed my toothbrush, a stick of deodorant, and most importantly, my heavily encrypted battle-hardened laptop. I had exactly $4.200 in a hidden checking account I had opened under a shell corporation. They didn't know about it. It was my emergency fund built from freelance coding gigs I did at night. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to keep me from sleeping on the pavement. When I walked out the front doors of the mansion, the sky broke open. A torrential downpour washed over the manicured lawns. The cold rain hit my face like tiny needles. I didn't pull up my hood. I tilted my head back and let the water run down my neck, soaking into the collar of my shirt. It felt real. It felt like a baptism. I was alive. The bus ride to the industrial edge of the city took 2 hours. The mansion faded into wealthy suburbs, which bled into commercial zones, which finally decayed into a landscape of cracked asphalt, chain-link fences, and neon signs buzzing with failing transformers. I rented a room above a 24-hour laundromat. It cost $800 a month, paid in cash. The walls were painted a depressing shade of institutional green. The mattress sagged in the middle like a dead horse, and the air constantly smelled of cheap detergent and stale grease from the alleyway diner. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. I locked the deadbolt. I sat cross-legged on the lumpy mattress, flipped open my laptop, and went to work. Aegis Logic was still mine. The syndicate couldn't touch it without my signature. And since I had severed my ties with the family, Any legal attempt to force me to honor Jade's forged documents would be tied up in litigation for years, time the syndicate didn't have. Harrison would have to pay them off himself to protect his precious golden child. But Aegis had zero capital. My server hosting bills were due in 2 weeks. I needed cash and I needed it fast. I closed my eyes and dug into the memories of my past life. I skipped over the trauma, the prison yard, the sneers of my parents. I dug into the news, what happened in the tech world in late 2026. There was the crypto crash, too volatile to capitalize on with my limited funds. There was the release of the new Titan AI model, unhelpful. Then I remembered the Sentinel breach. In exactly 18 days, Omnicorp, the largest cybersecurity provider for federal banks, was going to experience a catastrophic zero-day exploit. A flaw in their packet routing logic was going to be exposed by a Russian hacking group, resulting in billions of dollars in temporary losses in a massive stock plunge. In my past life, it took Omnicorp's engineers a month to patch the vulnerability. I opened a blank terminal window. The cursor blinked, a tiny pulsing heartbeat of green light in the dim room. I knew the flaw. I remembered reading the post-mortem analysis during my time in the prison library. More importantly, I knew the math behind the patch. For the next 2 weeks, I barely slept. I lived on instant ramen cooked in a rusted kettle and black coffee that tasted like battery acid. The neon sign from the laundromat flashed through my uncurtained window, casting rhythmic strobing shadows over my keyboard. My back ached. My eyes burned with a constant sandy grit. But I was smiling. Every line of code I wrote was a brick in a fortress they could never tear down. There was no Beatrice knocking on my door to criticize my posture. There was no Harrison demanding I attend a dinner with investors I hated. There was no Jade crying about a scratched bumper. There was only the terminal, the pure, unbiased logic of the machine. It didn't care who my father was. It only cared if the syntax was correct. On day 16, my fingers cramped, locking up completely. I massaged them until the blood flowed back. I ran the final compiler. 0 errors. The patch was complete. It was an elegant, lightweight algorithm that not only fixed the Omnicorp routing flaw, but optimized their data transfer speed by nearly 14%. Now I just had to wait. 2 days later, the world caught fire. I watched it happen on a tiny cracked television I had bought from a pawn shop for $20. The news anchors were sweating. Wall Street was bleeding red. Omnicorp stock was in freefall as banks reported massive server lockouts. The zero-day exploit was tearing through the financial sector exactly as it had in my past life. I opened my laptop. I drafted an email to Elias Vance. No relation to my dead name, just a coincidence. The Chief Technology Officer of Omnicorp. I didn't use my real name. I sent it through a heavily spoofed IP under the banner of Aegis Logic. I attached a heavily encrypted demo of the patch locked behind a self-destructing timer. Subject: the bleeding stops here. Body: I have the patch for your routing vulnerability. It works. It optimizes. You have 24 hours to verify the demo executable. If you want the source code, my price is $4. $5 million paid to the attached offshore escrow account, plus a 2% perpetual licensing fee for the optimization framework. Do not try to trace this. Do not negotiate. Tick-tock. Elias. I hit send. I closed the laptop. I lay back on the lumpy mattress and stared at the water stains on the ceiling. 6 hours later, my encrypted phone buzzed. An email notification from Elias Vance at Omnicorp. Com to Aegis Logic. We agree to your terms. Escrow is funded. Send the key. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The tension broke, washing over me in a wave of pure, unadulterated exhaustion. I transferred the decryption key, watched the escrow clear into my corporate account, and finally closed my eyes. I was rich. I was independent. I was untouchable. 6 months passed. The $4.5 million was just the seed. The 2% licensing fee from Omnicorp turned out to be a golden goose, generating a quiet, steady stream of massive revenue. Aegis Logic expanded from a rusted laptop in a damp room to a sleek, minimalist office in the financial district. I hired a small, viciously competent team of developers. I bought out my server hosts. I also upgraded my armor. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my penthouse apartment. The woman looking back at me was a stranger to the scared girl who had died on a hospital floor. She wore a tailored charcoal gray pantsuit cut from Italian wool. Her hair, once kept long and styled to Beatrice's demanding tastes, was chopped into a sharp asymmetrical bob. There was no fear in her eyes. Only cold, hard obsidian. Today was a Tuesday. I had a 10 a.m. coffee meeting with my wealth manager at the Gilded Bean, an obnoxiously expensive cafe near the stock exchange. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint chill of early autumn. I walked the 2 blocks from my office, the city parting around me. Wealth does that. It creates an invisible force field. People don't bump into a $4,000 suit. I arrived at the cafe, claimed a corner booth upholstered in crushed velvet, and ordered a black espresso. I opened my tablet, reviewing the quarterly projections for Aegis. The bell above the door chimed. I didn't look up. Not until a voice, high, reedy, and vibrating with an irritating frequency, cut through the low hum of the cafe. I don't understand why I can't just use the black card. Mother, the limit on this silver one is basically poverty level. How am I supposed to pay for the Aspen trip? My fingers froze, hovering over the glass screen. Slowly, I raised my eyes. Standing at the pastry counter were Beatrice and Jade. The change in them wasn't catastrophic, but to someone who knew them, it was glaring. Beatrice was wearing a trench coat from 2 seasons ago. Her posture was rigid, her jaw clenched tight enough to crack molars. Jade looked haggard. Her usually flawless blowout was frizzy, and the designer handbag clutched to her chest had a noticeable scuff on the leather. Harrison had paid the syndicate. I knew that through the grapevine. But coughing up $500,000 in liquid cash under threat of violence had forced him to liquidate assets at a heavy loss. The rumors in the financial sector suggested his firm was struggling. Without me there to blindly fix their tech infrastructure, they had suffered a massive data breach 3 months ago that cost them heavily in settlements. Lower your voice, Jade, Beatrice hissed, glancing nervously around the cafe. Your father is handling the liquidity issues. We just need to tighten our belts for a few weeks. I am tightening my belt. I didn't buy the Prada boots. Jade whined. She turned around dramatically, tossing her head. As she did, her gaze swept over the corner booths. Her eyes locked onto mine. For a second, blank confusion washed over her face. She didn't recognize me, not the haircut, not the suit, not the posture. But then the realization hit. Her jaw actually dropped. She elbowed Beatrice hard in the ribs. Mother, look. Beatrice followed her daughter's pointing finger. When she saw me, her eyes widened in shock. The last time she saw me, I was walking out into a rainstorm with a duffel bag. She fully expected me to be dead in a ditch, or at the very least waiting tables at a greasy spoon, waiting for the day I would come crawling back to beg for forgiveness. Instead, I was sitting behind a mahogany table, a Patek Philippe watch gleaming on my wrist, looking like the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Beatrice's shock quickly morphed into something else. Relief. Entitlement. She threw her shoulders back, plastered on a sickeningly sweet smile, and marched toward my booth. Jade trailed behind her, her eyes darting between my watch and my tablet. Nora, Beatrice gasped, clasping her hands together as if praying. Oh, my sweet girl, look at you. We have been worried, absolutely sick. I didn't stand up. I didn't smile. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. It was perfectly bitter. Have you? I asked, my voice flat, devoid of any inflection. Beatrice slid into the booth across from me without being invited. Jade hovered awkwardly at the edge of the table. Of course we have, Beatrice said, leaning forward, trying to project maternal warmth. Harrison was so furious when you left. But you know how your father is. He's a proud man. He just didn't know how to apologize. We've had private investigators looking for you for months. A lie. If they had hired a PI, they would have found me the second Aegis hit the public registry under my new commercial lease. They hadn't looked because they didn't care. They were only talking to me now because I looked like I had money. Is that so? I murmured. setting the cup down. Yes. And seeing you now, oh, Nora, you look wonderful. You clearly found your footing. We are so proud of you. Beatrice reached across the table, attempting to place her hand over mine. I pulled my hand back, letting her fingers hit the cold marble tabletop. Her smile twitched, but she forced it to stay. I know you're angry, darling, but family is family. We forgive you for your little rebellion. In fact, your father's firm is going through a slight technical transition right now. We could really use your expertise. We want you to come home. You can bring your little company under Harrison's umbrella. We'll be a team again. It was almost funny. The sheer blinding arrogance. They were drowning and they saw me as their lifeboat. They wanted me to save Harrison's failing firm. They wanted to steal Aegis again. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. I looked at Beatrice. Really looked at her. I saw the stress lines around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. She was terrified of losing her status. Let me stop you there, Mrs. Sterling, I said. Beatrice recoiled as if I had slapped her. Mrs. Sterling, Nora, I am your mother. No, you aren't, I said simply. A mother is a biological and emotional reality. Legally, however, you are a stranger to me. I believe you have a copy of the Declaration of Severance. I have mine framed in my office. Nora, that was just a scare tactic. We never filed it. Beatrice protested, her voice rising in panic. I know. I smiled. That's why I filed it myself the very next morning. It was fully notarized. After all, the judge expedited the ruling. Jade stepped forward, slamming her hands on the table. Do you know what we've been through? Daddy had to sell the yacht. I can't even go to Aspen. And you're sitting here in designer clothes. You need to give us that money. I looked at Jade, the sister I had died for. Give you money? I tilted my head. Why would I do that? You have a silver card. Jade, try not to buy the Prada boots. Nora, please, Beatrice said, her facade finally shattering. Genuine desperation leaked into her eyes. Harrison is facing bankruptcy. The syndicate, they took so much. And the data breach, we are losing clients every day. We need your help. They were begging. Exactly as the universe intended. The scales were finally balancing. You don't need my help, I said softly, leaning forward so they could see the absolute zero in my eyes. You need a scapegoat. You need a human shield. You used me up in my last life. And I am not letting you do it in this one. Your last life? What are you talking about? Beatrice whispered, looking at me as if I had lost my mind. It doesn't matter, I said, closing my tablet and standing up. I towered over Beatrice, looking down at the crown of her outdated coat. What matters is this. I don't know you. I don't care about you. If Harrison goes bankrupt, I will buy his firm for pennies on the dollar and fire him. If Jade gets her legs broken by bookies, I will send a very polite floral arrangement to the hospital. Do not approach me again. Do not email me. If you do, I will unleash corporate lawyers that will drain the last few dollars out of your pathetic accounts. I threw a $50 bill on the table to cover the espresso. Keep the change, Beatrice. It looks like you need it. I turned and walked out of the cafe, stepping back into the crisp morning air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my lead developer. Server migration complete. We're ready for the Phase 2 launch. I smiled. The cold autumn wind whipped through my hair. The past was finally dead. And the future belonged entirely to me. Panic has a scent. It smells like stale sweat desperately masked by Tom Ford cologne, radiating off men in three-piece suits who just realized their math doesn't add up. Harrison's lawyers smelled exactly like that when they walked into my conference room on a rainy Tuesday morning. They were a pair of aging bulldogs from a white shoe firm Harrison had kept on retainer for decades. 2 months had passed since the cafe incident with Beatrice and Jade. True to my prediction, Harrison's wealth management firm was bleeding out. The syndicate he'd paid off to save Jade had drained his liquidity, leaving him exposed when the market took a mild dip. Clients were jumping ship. Creditors were circling. So Harrison did what parasites always do. He tried to attach himself to a new host. Intellectual property theft. The older lawyer, a man named Higgins said as he slid a thick manila folder across the glass table. Harrison is claiming that the foundational code for Aegis logic was written while you were a dependent living under his roof, utilizing hardware purchased with his funds. Therefore, the company's valuation belongs in part to his estate. I didn't even look at the folder. I looked at Hayes, my lead counsel. Hayes was 32, sharp as a razor, and entirely immune to old money intimidation tactics. Hayes let out a slow, amused breath. Are you gentlemen actually filing this? Or is this just a dramatic reading for my benefit? Because if you file this, I will countersue for frivolous litigation so fast it will snap your collective necks. The hardware was purchased by Harrison, Higgins insisted, though his voice lacked the booming confidence it probably had in the elevator. The laptop was a refurbished model I bought for $300 off Craigslist. I said, my voice quiet, cutting through the posturing. The receipt is in my tax filings. Furthermore, I legally severed myself from his estate. He has zero claim to my assets. You know this. He knows this. He is prepared to drag this out in court. Nora, the second lawyer chimed in. It will tie up Aegis Logic's assets. It will scare your investors. A settlement of 20% equity would make this go away. Extortion, barefaced and desperate. In my past life, Harrison had used this exact same tone to convince me that going to prison for Jade was a strategic family move. He thought I was still that terrified girl, desperate to avoid conflict. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cold glass. Tell Harrison I have a counteroffer, I said. Higgins perked up, pulling a gold pen from his breast pocket. We are listening. You have 24 hours to withdraw this threat, I told them, watching their expressions falter. If you don't, I won't just fight you in court. I will buy Harrison's outstanding debt from the Sterling Cooper banking group. I happen to know they are holding about 40 million of his toxic commercial real estate loans, and they are desperate to offload them. I will buy that paper at a discount, and I will personally call the loans in. I will foreclose on his firm, his cars, and the house Beatrice is currently sitting in. Silence dropped over the room, heavy, suffocating, absolute. Higgins swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his tight collar. You would bankrupt your own father to save 20%. He isn't my father, I replied. And I would burn his life to the ground for a single share. Get out of my office. They didn't say another word. They packed up their ridiculous folder and scurried out the glass doors like roaches fleeing a flashlight. Hayes chuckled softly beside me, tapping his stylus against his tablet. Think they'll file? Not a chance, I said, standing up and smoothing the front of my blazer. Harrison is a bully. Bullies only understand overwhelming force. Start drafting the acquisition papers for his debt anyway. I want the gun loaded even if I don't fire it today. Power. Real power isn't about yelling or throwing tantrums. It's about having the structural capacity to dismantle someone's life with a few strokes of a keyboard and the absolute emotional detachment to do it without losing a minute of sleep. For the first time since waking up in that study, the knot of lingering anxiety at the base of my skull finally dissolved. Harrison couldn't touch me. I had outgrown his shadow. Porcelain shatters with a satisfyingly crisp snap. I learned this because a massive terracotta planter in the lobby of the Aegis Logic building was currently in dozens of pieces across the Italian marble floor. Dirt and shredded palm leaves were scattered everywhere. Standing in the center of the mess, screaming at my security guards, was Jade. It was 11 p.m. on a Friday. I had been upstairs running final diagnostics on a server migration when the front desk called. When the elevator door slid open, the sound of her voice hit me like a physical blow. It was the same shrill, entitled shriek she used when she didn't get the right luxury car for her 16th birthday. But now it was frayed around the edges, ragged. Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? I own this building. My sister owns this building. Jade thrashed against the grip of two broad-shouldered security guards. She looked awful. The glossy veneer of the golden child had entirely rubbed off. She was wearing a stained silk slip dress. Her mascara was smeared halfway down her cheeks, and she was missing a shoe. The smell of cheap tequila and stale cigarette smoke hung around her in a thick cloud. Ma'am, please, one of the guards said, clearly trying not to hurt her despite her kicking. We've already called the police. Cancel them, she shrieked. Then she saw me. She stopped thrashing. Her chest heaved, pulling in jagged, ragged breaths. For a split second, I saw a flicker of the little sister who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms when we were children. But it was instantly swallowed by the toxic, gaping maw of her narcissism. Tell them to let me go, Nora, she demanded. Not a request, an order. I walked slowly across the lobby, my heels clicking sharply against the intact marble, stopping just out of arm's reach. Why are you destroying my lobby, Jade? I asked. My voice was calm, a stark contrast to her erratic frenzy. Because you wouldn't answer your phone, she screamed, tears finally spilling over her ruined makeup. I called you 30 times. They took my car. Nora. The repo men came to the club and dragged me out of my own G-Wagon in front of everyone. It was humiliating. Harrison's assets are frozen, I stated. You knew the car was leased under the firm. This shouldn't be a surprise. I don't care about the firm. She lunged forward, but the guards held her back. I need cash. You have millions. I saw the Forbes article. Just give me 50 grand. It's nothing to you. It's pocket change. I stared at her. In the previous timeline, this was the exact state she was in when she came to me after running over that pedestrian. Drunk, hysterical, demanding I fix her mess. I had looked at her then and felt a crushing wave of protective love. I had ruined my life to save hers. Now I looked at her and felt absolutely nothing. Just a mild annoyance at the mess she was making on my floor. I don't carry cash, I said. Write me a check. Transfer it. She was hyperventilating now, the alcohol fueling her panic. Mom is losing her mind. Dad is drinking all day. It's a nightmare in that house. Nora, you have to help us. We're family. We were never a family. Jade, I said softly, the truth of the words ringing clear in the empty lobby. You were the pet. I was the wallet. Now the wallet is gone, and the pet doesn't know how to feed itself. Her face twisted into a mask of pure ugly hatred. You arrogant, you think you're better than us. You're nothing. You're just the freak who sat in her room coding while I actually lived a life. You owe me, for what? I asked genuinely. For ignoring me. For mocking me. For letting Harrison use me as collateral for your gambling debts. Red and blue lights flashed through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the lobby. The police had arrived. Panic seized her features. The anger evaporated, replaced instantly by the manipulative terror she had perfected over 20 years. No, Nora, please don't let them take me. I have a record. The gambling thing, I'm on probation. If I get arrested, they'll put me in jail. Please, I'm your sister. 2 officers walked through the revolving doors, their boots crunching on the shattered terracotta. They assessed the scene immediately, zeroing in on Jade. Is this the trespasser? The lead officer asked my security guard. Yes, officer, I answered before the guard could speak. She broke into the building, destroyed company property, and assaulted my security staff. Jade stared at me, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. She suddenly understood that the invisible safety net she had danced on her entire life was completely gone. Nora, she whispered. It was the first time I had ever heard her voice completely stripped of entitlement. It was just raw, naked fear. Take her away. I told the officers. I didn't watch as they cuffed her. I didn't listen to her sobbing as they read her rights and dragged her out the doors. I turned my back, walked to the front desk, and calmly asked the night manager to call a cleaning crew for the dirt. Consequences were a bitter pill, but she was finally going to swallow them. Gavel strikes sound remarkably like coffin nails if you listen closely enough. The bankruptcy auction for Vanguard Capital was held in a sterile, windowless room in the basement of the county courthouse. It smelled of floor wax and failure. I sat in the very back row. I wore a tailored black trench coat, entirely appropriate for a funeral. Harrison sat at the front defense table. He looked 10 years older than the man who had tried to force me to sign away my company just 8 months ago. His hair, usually a perfectly dyed silver mane, was thinning and unkempt. The bespoke suit hung loosely on his shoulders. He had lost weight. He had lost his firm. He had lost his power. The auction was quick and brutal. The liquidator read through the lots in a monotone drone: the corporate accounts, the commercial real estate holdings, the intellectual property. My holding company bought it all. I didn't bid personally. I had a proxy sitting 3 rows ahead of me, doing the heavy lifting, raising a numbered paddle to systematically outbid every vulture circling Harrison's remains. I bought his firm for 12 cents on the dollar. When the gavel fell for the final time, Harrison stood up. He looked around the room, dazed, trying to find the face of the billionaire who had just swallowed his legacy whole. His eyes scanned past the proxy and landed on me. He froze. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under harsh lights. I stood up, buttoned my coat, and walked down the center aisle. The remaining lawyers and creditors filtered out of the room, leaving just me and the man who used to call himself my father. "You," he croaked, his voice cracking like dry wood. "It was you." "Hello, Harrison," I said, stopping a few feet from his table. "I told your lawyers I was going to buy your debt. I decided to wait for the clearance sale instead. It was much more cost-effective." He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white, a mixture of rage, humiliation, and deep, profound confusion wore on his face. "Why?" he whispered. "You have your millions. You have your company. Why come back and do this just for spite?" "Spite is an emotional reaction," I told him, looking at the man who had ordered me to go to a concrete cell for a crime I didn't commit. "This wasn't spite. This was an audit. You spent 20 years treating me like an asset, a safety deposit box you could break open whenever Jade made a mistake. I just finalized the accounting. I gave you everything." He suddenly roared, the old tyrannical Harrison flaring to life for one last pathetic moment. He slammed his fist on the table. "I fed you. I housed you. I paid for your education. You owe your entire existence to me. You paid for a prop." I corrected him smoothly. "You paid for a quiet, obedient daughter to make your family photos look good. But the second I wasn't useful, you handed me a pen and told me to sign away my life. You built this bed, Harrison. I just bought the mattress." He sagged, the anger leaving him as quickly as it came, leaving behind a hollow, defeated old man. He looked down at the floor. "Jade is in county lockup," he muttered, his voice trembling. "Beatrice is living in a rented condo. I don't have anything left, Nora. They took the house. They took the cars. This firm was all I had." He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. It was the ultimate manipulation, the tears of a tyrant. "Please," he said, the word choking him on the way out. "You own Vanguard now. You need someone to run the traditional assets division. I know the clients. I know the system. Let me work for you. Let me earn it back." I looked at him. I really looked at him. I searched the depths of my own chest, waiting for the familiar pang of guilt, the ingrained childhood desperate need to please him. The silence stretched. The courthouse air conditioning hummed. There was nothing. The well was completely dry. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of the Declaration of Severance. I placed it gently on the table in front of him. "I don't hire liabilities," I said calmly. "And I don't do business with strangers." I turned my back on him. I didn't wait for his reaction. I didn't need to hear him cry or scream or beg. His pain held no currency in my world anymore. I walked out of the sterile courtroom, pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the courthouse, and stepped out into the bright, blinding afternoon sun. The city was loud, chaotic, and moving at 1,000 miles an hour. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed my assistant. "Cancel the rest of my meetings today," I instructed as a black town car pulled up to the curb to meet me. "Of course. Is everything all right?" she asked. I looked back at the courthouse one last time. The heavy stone pillars looked like a tomb. I smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. "Everything is perfect," I said. "I'm just going to take the afternoon off. I think I'd like to go for a drive." Charity galas are a fascinating exercise in collective hypocrisy. A room full of billionaires wearing outfits that cost more than a teacher's annual salary, drinking vintage champagne, and patting themselves on the back for donating a fraction of a % of their net worth to a cause they will forget about by breakfast. I hated them. But as the CEO of Aegis Logic, my attendance was occasionally mandatory. Tonight, I was funding a new STEM initiative for at-risk youth. I had just finished handing over a ceremonial oversized check and was standing on the terrace of the museum, letting the cool night air pull the heat of the ballroom off my skin. The city stretched out below, a grid of electric gold in shadow. I always loved you in emerald green. The voice was soft, fragile, and utterly out of place. I turned around. Standing near a towering marble column, half hidden in the shadows, was Beatrice. She looked small. The aggressive pearl-wearing matriarch from the mahogany study was gone. In her place was an aging woman in a black dress that was just slightly out of season, holding a small worn leather box in her trembling hands. The security detail at the front door must have assumed she was lost. She certainly looked it. "How did you get in here, Beatrice?" I asked, keeping my voice level. I didn't reach for my phone to call security. She wasn't a threat. She was a ghost. "I told the girls at the desk I was your mother," she said, offering a weak, wavering smile. "They didn't check the guest list. People still remember the name Nora," I said. "They still respect it. They respect the endowment you used to have." I corrected her. "Now you're trespassing." She flinched, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she took a step closer, holding out the leather box like an offering. "I found this," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "When the bank foreclosed on the house, they gave us 2 hours to pack our personal belongings. I left my jewelry. I left Harrison's watches. But I made sure to grab this." She flipped the lid open. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was a silver charm bracelet. It was tarnished. The little metal figures, a computer mouse, a book, a star, dull and scratched. I stared at it. I remembered that bracelet. "You bought this for me when I was 12, I said softly. Beatrice's face lit up with a desperate, hungry relief. Yes, I did. Do you remember? You won the county science fair. You built that little radio out of spare parts. Harrison was busy, but I was there. I bought you this to celebrate. I was so proud of you, Nora. I have always been proud of you. Deep down, you know that." She was weaponizing nostalgia. It was a classic abuser's tactic. When the threats fail, when the power is gone, they pivot to manufactured sentimentality. They try to convince you that the nightmare you survived was actually a dream. I looked from the tarnished silver to Beatrice's pleading, watery eyes. "I remember that day perfectly," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial calm. "I won first place. But that's not why you bought the bracelet, Beatrice." Her smile faltered. "Of course it was. You bought it," I continued, stepping closer until she had to tilt her head up to look at me. "Because on the drive home from the fair, you stopped at the country club. You wanted to have drinks with the Miller women. You told me to wait in the car. It was July. The air conditioning was off." Beatrice took a short, sharp breath, stepping back. "I sat in that roasting car for 3 hours," I said, the memory tasting like hot dust in my mouth. "When you finally came out, you were drunk. I was crying. I had thrown up on my dress from the heat stroke. You panicked because you knew Harrison would yell at you for ruining the upholstery in the Mercedes. So, you dragged me into a cheap gift shop down the street, bought this $15 piece of junk, and told me that if I kept my mouth shut about the car, it was my prize for the science fair. Nora, no. That's not how it happened. You're remembering it wrong. You were just a child." She was shaking her head violently, her hands trembling so badly the charms rattled against each other. "I remember exactly how it happened," I said. "Just like I remember you and Harrison trying to sell me to a prison cell to keep Jade out of one. Your memories are convenient lies you tell yourself so you can sleep at night. I don't operate on lies. Please," Beatrice sobbed, the tears finally spilling over, ruining her carefully applied makeup. "Harrison is drinking himself to death in a 2-bedroom apartment. Jade won't even speak to me. I have no one. Nora. I have nothing. I'm your mother. You can't just erase me." "I didn't erase you," I told her quietly. I just stopped pretending you existed. There's a difference. I reached out, took the leather box from her shaking hands, and snapped it shut. I didn't give it back. I dropped it into the nearest trash can beside the terrace doors. The hollow thud echoed in the quiet night air. Goodbye, Beatrice, I said. I turned my back on her and walked back into the warmth of the ballroom. I didn't look over my shoulder. The music swelled. The champagne glasses clinked. And by the time I reached my table, the encounter was already fading from my mind, as irrelevant as a misspelled word on a deleted document. In the original timeline, the phone call that ended my life came at 2:14 a.m. On a rainy Thursday, when my phone vibrated on my nightstand, the digital clock glowing red with the numbers 2 verse 14, a violent shiver ripped through my spine. Outside my penthouse window, rain lashed against the reinforced glass. I sat up. The sheets were cold. My heart hammered against my ribs, a primal animal panic seizing my throat. It was the exact date, the exact time. The universe has a cruel cyclical rhythm, a terrifying tendency to repeat its favorite melodies. I reached for the phone. It was an unknown number. I pressed answer, putting it on speaker, and set it on the mattress. I didn't say a word. This is a collect call from the county correctional facility. Press 1 to accept. The automated voice was flat, metallic, indifferent. I pressed 1. Nora, are you there? Oh my God. Please tell me you're there. Jade. Her voice was raw, shredded by screaming. In the background, I could hear the distinct chaotic sounds of a police precinct holding area, heavy metal doors clanging shut, the low aggressive murmur of exhausted cops, the shouting of drunks in holding cells. I'm here, I said. Nora, you have to help me. You have to come get me right now. She was hyperventilating, the words tumbling out of her mouth in a wet, panicked rush. I messed up so bad. It wasn't my fault. The road was slick and the guy just came out of nowhere. The air in my bedroom seemed to freeze. My lungs locked up. What did you do, Jade? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I hit a guy, she shrieked. I was driving. I borrowed a friend's car. We were at a party and I was just trying to get home. I didn't even see him in the crosswalk. Nora, there was so much blood. The ambulance took him. The cops are here. They gave me a breathalyzer. I blew over the limit. They're charging me with aggravated vehicular assault and a DUI. It was happening again. The exact same accident. The exact same victim. The exact same crime. In the previous life, she had driven to my tiny apartment, hysterical, covered in the victim's blood. Harrison had arrived 10 minutes later with his lawyers, demanding I take the keys, demanding I say I was the one behind the wheel. She won't survive jail. Nora, you're strong. Do this for the family. Where are Harrison and Beatrice? I asked, staring blankly at the dark wall of my bedroom. Mom isn't answering her phone. Jade sobbed. And Dad picked up. But he was wasted. He just yelled at me and hung up. You're the only one I have left. You're my sister. You have all those lawyers. You have money. You can fix this. Just send someone. Tell them to say you were driving. Or just pay them off. Do something. She actually said it. Even now, after everything, her default instinct was to throw me in front of the train to save her own skin. She wanted me to take the fall. The lingering panic in my chest completely evaporated. The ghost of my past death released its grip on my throat. Did you hear me, Nora? Jade screamed into the receiver. They're going to put me in prison. I violated my probation. The guard said I'm looking at 5 to 10 years. I can't go to prison. I'll die in there. I know, I said. My voice was steady, anchored by an absolute unshakable peace. The food is terrible. The beds are hard. And if you look at someone the wrong way in the yard, they will put a piece of sharpened metal into your ribs. It hurts more than you can possibly imagine. Silence hung on the line, broken only by Jade's ragged, confused breathing. What are you talking about? She whispered. I'm talking about consequences. Jade, I said. You killed a man tonight, or you severely injured him. You made the choice to drink. You made the choice to drive. And now you are going to pay the bill. Nora, please. You can't do this to me. The sheer terror in her voice was absolute. The reality of the concrete walls closing in around her was finally breaking through her lifelong delusion of invincibility. I didn't do anything to you. I replied. I'm just a woman sleeping in her bed. I don't know you. You have the wrong number. Nora, don't hang up. Nora, I pressed the red button. The screen went dark. The room was silent again, save for the rain beating against the glass. I didn't go back to sleep. I got out of bed, walked into my kitchen, and poured myself a glass of cold water. I stood by the window and watched the city lights blur in the storm. The next morning, I checked the local news on my tablet while drinking my coffee. It was a brief segment on the morning broadcast. A 22-year-old woman with a prior record had struck a pedestrian while driving under the influence. The victim was in critical but stable condition. The driver was being held without bail due to her probation violation. She was going to serve 5 years minimum. I closed the tablet, put my coffee cup in the sink, and went to work. 14 months later, the smell of sandalwood and old scotch was entirely gone from my memory. Aegis Logic had gone public in the spring, a massive IPO that shattered quarterly projections and cemented my status in the tech sector. But wealth, I had learned, was just a tool. It wasn't the destination. The destination was freedom. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was standing in the newly renovated East Wing of the Mercy General Hospital. I had just cut the ribbon on the Aegis Trauma Center, fully funded by my personal foundation. The hospital administrators were fawning over me, shaking my hand, taking photos for the press release. I smiled politely, gave the required sound bites, and eventually slipped away from the crowd. Needing a moment of quiet, I walked down the long, sterile corridor of the 3rd floor. My expensive heels clicked against the linoleum. The air smelled of iodine and bleached linen. I stopped outside room 314. This was the room in the timeline that only I remembered. This was where I had bled out. This was where the prison doctors had brought me after the stabbing. Where my lungs had collapsed. Where I had looked up and seen my mother holding Jade's hand instead of mine as the monitors flatlined. I looked through the small glass window of the door. The room was empty right now. Just a perfectly made bed, a chair, and the quiet hum of a heart monitor on standby. I pressed my hand against the glass. I expected to feel a phantom pain in my ribs. I expected to feel the suffocating terror of abandonment. But there was nothing. The room held no power over me anymore. It was just a room. The girl who died in there was a stranger to me now. She was weak, desperate for love from people entirely incapable of giving it. She died so I could live. Nora. I turned my head. Sitting in a cheap plastic chair near the elevator banks, clutching a styrofoam cup of terrible hospital coffee, was Harrison. He was unrecognizable. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a faded gray sweater that hung off his gaunt frame. His hair was entirely white, thinning wildly. His skin was sallow, deeply lined with exhaustion and chronic stress. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. He slowly stood up, his hands shaking slightly, spilling a few drops of the coffee onto his slacks. He didn't seem to notice. I saw the cameras downstairs, he rasped. His voice lacked any of its old booming authority. It was thin, reedy. I heard you were here. I didn't move. I just looked at him, analyzing him the same way I would analyze a faulty line of legacy code. Beatrice is inside, he said, gesturing weakly down the hall toward the cardiovascular wing. She had a stroke last night, a bad one. The doctors, they don't think she's going to regain mobility on her left side. The stress of Jade's sentencing, the eviction from the apartment, it was too much for her. He looked at me, his eyes sunken and entirely defeated. There was no anger left in him, no entitlement, just the pathetic crushing weight of a ruined man realizing the absolute finality of his choices. I don't have the insurance to cover the rehabilitation facility they're recommending, Harrison whispered, tears welling in the corners of his eyes, spilling over his wrinkled cheeks. Medicare only covers so much. They're going to send her to a state-run home. Nora, please. I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for her. He took a step toward me. A beggar approaching a queen. She's your mother. He choked out. Don't let her die in a state ward. I looked at Harrison. I thought about the heavy Parker pen on the mahogany desk. I thought about the rain soaking my college hoodie as I walked away from his mansion. I thought about the millions of dollars currently sitting in my charitable accounts, a fraction of which could easily pay for Beatrice's care. I'm sorry to hear about your wife's condition, I said. My voice was perfectly polite, perfectly empty. I hope she finds comfort in whatever facility she ends up in. Harrison froze. His jaw trembled. Nora, you have so much. It would cost you nothing. It would cost me my peace. I replied simply. And I value my peace far more than I value your wife's comfort. You're a monster, he whispered. A weak, dying ember of his old rage flickering in his eyes. No, I said, offering him a small, genuinely relaxed smile. I'm just a stranger. Excuse me. My driver is waiting. I turned and walked toward the VIP elevator. I didn't look back as the doors slid open. I didn't listen to the sound of his quiet, ragged sobbing echoing down the sterile hallway. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the doors slide shut, cutting off the sight of him forever. When I stepped out of the hospital doors and into the bright, blinding sunshine, the city air hit my face. It smelled like exhaust fumes, roasting peanuts from a street vendor, and hot asphalt. It was the greatest thing I had ever breathed. I got into the back of my car. Where to, ma'am? The driver asked. I looked out the window at the towering glass skyline I had conquered. My lungs expanded, full and unbroken. Take me home, I said. If you felt the absolute satisfaction of Nora finally walking away with her head held high, this journey proves that the best revenge isn't anger, it's outgrowing the people who tried to break you. What did you think of Nora's final confrontation at the hospital? Was she too cold? Or did Harrison and Beatrice get exactly what they deserved? Share your thoughts. Don't forget to share this story with anyone who needs a reminder of their own worth. Stay strong.